I stared numbly at the polished mahogany casket before me, my heart heavy with a grief that felt both profound and undeserved. My brother-in-law Eric had been taken from this world far too soon, leaving behind his wife, my sister Sarah, and their young son, Rowan. As the mourners gathered around, offering hushed condolences and sharing memories of Eric's warmth and kindness, a familiar voice cut through the solemn atmosphere like a blade. "This is an absolute disgrace." My father Martin spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "How could you even think of taking that boy in, Julia? Do you have any idea what you're getting yourself into?" I felt the weight of every eye in the room bore into me as Martin continued his tirade. "He's autistic, for God's sake. You have no business raising a child with special needs. It's a burden you're not equipped to handle." A surge of protective fury welled up within me, and before I could stop myself, the words tumbled out. "How dare you, Dad? How dare you stand here at Eric's funeral and speak so callously about his son, your own grandson?" Martin's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. "Don't you take that tone with me, young lady. I'm just trying to be realistic. You and Barrett have enough on your plates without adding a special needs child to the mix." "Eric trusted us to care for Rowan," I shot back, my voice rising. "He knew we would love and support him in a way you clearly can't comprehend." The hushed murmurs around us grew louder, but I paid them no heed. This was a reckoning long overdue, and I wasn't about to back down. "You've never understood or accepted Rowan's condition," I continued, my words laced with a lifetime's worth of frustration. "You see his autism as a flaw, a burden, instead of recognizing the incredible gift he is." Martin's face flushed crimson, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. But before he could respond, a small voice piped up from behind me. "Auntie Julia?" I turned to see Rowan standing there, his big brown eyes filled with confusion and hurt. In that moment, everything else faded away. The mourners, my father's vid, even the casket that had sparked this ugly confrontation. All that mattered was this precious child, who had already endured more pain than any child should. Kneeling down, I gathered Rowan into my arms, holding him close. "It's okay, sweetie," I whispered, stroking his hair. "You're safe with me. I'll always protect you." As I stood, cradling Rowan against my chest, I met my father's gaze with a steely resolve. "This is my family now, Dad, and if you can't accept that, then you've lost more than you'll ever realize." Turning my back on the stunned silence that had fallen over the room, I walked away, my steps determined and unwavering. The path ahead might be fraught with challenges, but I knew in that moment that I would face them all. For Rowan, for my sister, and for the family we would build together, no matter who tried to stand in our way. The drive home from the memorial service was tense and silent. Barrett kept stealing glances at me, his brow furrowed with concern, but he knew better than to press me, while the confrontation with my father was still so raw. Rowan, exhausted from the emotional upheaval, had fallen asleep in the back seat, his soft snores the only sound breaking the heavy stillness. It wasn't until we were safely behind the closed doors of our home that the dam finally broke. The tears came in great, heaving sobs, born of equal parts anger and anguish. Barrett held me close, stroking my hair and murmuring soothing words as I poured out the pain and humiliation of my father's cruel outburst. How could he say those things? I choked out between gasps. In front of everyone at Eric's funeral? What kind of monster does that to their own family? Barrett's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with barely contained fury. "He's the monster, Julia? Not you, and certainly not Rowan. Your father is the one who should be ashamed." I knew he was right, but the words did little to dull the sting of my father's rejection. Rowan was the light of my life, a bright and beautiful soul who deserved only love and acceptance. Yet to Martin, he was little more than a burden, a source of embarrassment to be shunned and disparaged. "We have to protect Rowan from him," I said fiercely, pulling back to meet Barrett's gaze. "He'll never stop trying to turn us against each other, to make us doubt our decision to take Rowan in." Barrett nodded grimly. "Then we'll make it official. We'll adopt him, legally and permanently. That way, your father can never try to take him away from us." The idea both thrilled and terrified me. Adopting Rowan would solidify our commitment to him, but it would also sever any remaining ties to my parents, a reality I wasn't sure I was ready to face. As if sensing my hesitation, Barrett cupped my face in his hands, his touch gentle but resolute. "Julia, listen to me. Your parents have made their choice, and it's a cruel one. But we have the chance to choose differently, to create the family Rowan deserves, free from their judgment and cruelty." His words struck a chord deep within me, reigniting the fierce protectiveness I'd felt at the memorial service. Rowan was my priority now, my reason for standing tall in the face of adversity. And if that meant cutting ties with my parents, so be it. "You're right," I said, steeling my resolve. "Let's do it. Let's make Rowan officially ours once and for all." The broad smile that spread across Barrett's face was one of pure joy and relief. He pulled me into a tight embrace, and in that moment, I knew we were making the right decision. For Rowan, for our family, and for ourselves. Little did I know, however, that my father's vengeance was only just beginning. The battle lines had been drawn, and he was prepared to fight dirty to regain the control and influence he so desperately craved. But I was ready. Ready to protect my family at all costs, no matter what obstacles my father tried to throw in our path. The weeks following Eric's funeral were some of the most trying of my life. It started with the whispers, little snippets of gossip overheard at the grocery store, the gas station, even the park where Rowan loved to play. People I'd known my entire life, neighbors and acquaintances, suddenly seemed to regard me with a mixture of pity and thinly veiled disdain. At first, I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to small-town rumor mills and overactive imaginations. But the comments grew more pointed, more malicious, until I could no longer ignore the pattern. "I heard she's having money troubles and can't even afford to send that poor boy to a special school. Did you know her husband lost his job? How are they going to care for a child with special needs?" The cruelty of the words stung, but what hurt more was the realization of where they were coming from. My father, the man who had once doted on me and showered me with pride, was now waging a campaign of character assassination, trying to turn the entire community against me. Barrett insisted we confront him, demand an explanation for his actions. But I knew it would be pointless. In my father's eyes, I had committed the ultimate betrayal, publicly humiliating him and stripping him of his power and control. This was his twisted form of revenge, a way to reassert his dominance and force me to bend to his will. So instead of confronting him directly, I focused my energy on trying to shield Rowan from the fallout. I pulled him from school, afraid of the whispers and stares he might face from classmates whose parents had surely heard the rumors. I stopped going to the grocery store, the park, anywhere I might run into familiar faces and be bombarded with thinly veiled accusations. But even within the sanctuary of our home, the tension was palpable. Strange occurrences began to happen, things going missing, strange noises in the night, even a few unsettling pranks that felt more like thinly veiled threats. "Julia, we can't live like this," Barrett said one night as we sat huddled on the couch, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. "Your father has gone too far. We need to do something." I knew he was right, but the thought of taking legal action against my own father filled me with a sense of dread. Still, I couldn't let his vendetta continue unchecked, not when Rowan's well-being was on the line. "Okay," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and resolve. "We'll start documenting everything, the rumors, the incidents, everything. We'll build a case, and if he doesn't back off, we'll have no choice but to take it to the authorities." Barrett nodded grimly, his hand finding mine and giving it a reassuring squeeze. "We'll get through this, Julia. Together. Your father won't win. Not this time." As I lay awake that night, listening to the steady breathing of my husband and nephew beside me, I couldn't help but wonder how things had spiraled so far out of control. What had once been a close-knit family was now fractured beyond repair, torn apart by hatred, jealousy, and a stubborn refusal to accept the truth. But as I watched the first rays of dawn creep through the curtains, I made a silent vow. No matter what obstacles my father threw in our path, no matter how low he stooped, I would never back down. Rowan deserved a life free from judgment and cruelty, and I would fight until my last breath to give him that. Even if it meant severing the last remaining ties to the man who had once been my hero. The school's annual Family Fun Day was supposed to be a joyous occasion. a chance for parents, teachers, and students to come together and celebrate their close-knit community. But as Barrett, Rowan, and I made our way through the bustling crowd, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. People I'd known my entire life, neighbors and friends, suddenly averted their gazes or huddled together in tight clusters, whispering behind cupped hands. A few even had the audacity to point and stare as we passed, their expressions a toxic mix of pity and contempt. "Julia, what's going on?" Barrett murmured, his brow furrowed with concern. "Why is everyone looking at us like that?" Before I could respond, a sharp voice cut through the din, sending a chill down my spine. "Mrs. Trenton? Julia Trenton?" I turned to see a stern-faced woman striding toward us, her posture rigid and her eyes narrowed with something akin to righteous indignation. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Janice Thompson from Child Protective Services," the woman announced, loud enough for everyone around us to hear. "I'm afraid we've received an anonymous report raising concerns about the welfare of your nephew, Rowan Moore." The world seemed to shift beneath my feet as a hush fell over the crowd. I could feel their eyes boring into me, judging, accusing, all thanks to my father's relentless campaign of lies and manipulation. "That's ridiculous," Barrett spat, his face flushed with anger. "Rowan is perfectly safe and well cared for with us. This is nothing but a malicious attempt to smear our family's name." Janice's expression remained impassive, but I caught a flicker of doubt in her eyes, a hint that perhaps she sensed something wasn't quite adding up. "Be that as it may," she said coolly, "we have a legal obligation to investigate any report of potential child endangerment or neglect. I'll need to speak with Rowan privately and inspect your home." The words hung in the air like a lead weight, suffocating me with their implications. My father had finally crossed a line, stooping so low as to weaponize the very system meant to protect children like Rowan. But even as anger and humiliation threatened to consume me, I forced myself to remain calm. For Rowan's sake. He didn't understand what was happening, why these strangers were suddenly invading our lives and subjecting us to such scrutiny. Swallowing hard, I nodded. "Of course, we have nothing to hide." Janice's expression softened ever so slightly, and I realized in that moment that she was simply doing her job, following protocol regardless of her personal feelings on the matter. As she led Rowan away to conduct her interview, I turned to face the crowd, my chin held high in defiance. "You should all be ashamed of yourselves," I said, my voice ringing out with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "Listening to lies and gossip instead of seeing the truth right in front of you. Rowan is loved, cherished, and cared for, something none of you seem to understand." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and damning. I didn't care if I'd made enemies of every single person there. My only concern was protecting my family, no matter how high the cost. As Janice returned with Rowan, her expression inscrutable, I braced myself for the worst. But the words that followed caught me completely off guard. "I don't see any evidence of neglect or endangerment here," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. "In fact, it's clear to me that Rowan is thriving in your care." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers, and I felt a surge of vindication so powerful it was almost dizzying. My father's twisted scheme had failed, his lies exposed for all to see. But even as relief washed over me, I knew this was far from over. If anything, I suspected this humiliating public rebuke would only fan the flames of my father's rage, driving him to even more desperate and underhanded tactics. As we made our way back to the car, Rowan chattering happily beside us, I caught Barrett's eye and saw my own determination reflected back at me. This was war, and we were ready for battle. The ride home from the school was a tense, charged silence. Rowan, blissfully unaware of the drama that had unfolded, babbled happily to himself in the back seat. But Barrett and I shared a look that said everything. This was far from over. As soon as we were through the front door, Barrett rounded on me, his expression a mix of fury and grim determination. "That's it," he growled. "We're done playing by his rules. It's time to fight back." I nodded, my own anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You're right. We need to take the gloves off before he takes things even further." The thought of going toe-to-toe with my own father filled me with a sense of dread, but I knew we had no choice. His vendetta had already put Rowan at risk, and I refused to let that happen again. We need evidence, I said, my mind whirring. Proof of everything he's done, the rumors, the pranks, the bogus report to child services. Anything we can use to expose him for the vindictive monster he's become. Barrett nodded grimly. I'll start documenting everything, compiling a timeline of events, and we'll need witnesses, people who can corroborate what he's been up to. As if on cue, there was a tentative knock at the front door. Exchanging a wary glance with Barrett, I crossed the room and pulled it open, revealing our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Hendricks, wringing her hands nervously. "Julia, dear," she said, her voice hushed and tremulous. "I'm so sorry about what happened at the school today. That must have been just awful for you and your family." I opened my mouth to respond, but she barreled on, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I saw the whole thing, you know, and I couldn't help but notice that social services woman didn't seem entirely convinced by that anonymous report, almost like she suspected something wasn't quite right." My heart began to pound as realization dawned. Mrs. Hendricks had always been a kind, if somewhat nosy, neighbor, but in that moment she was offering us a lifeline. "You don't think—" I began, hardly daring to hope. Mrs. Hendricks shot a furtive glance over her shoulder before leaning in close. "I think someone may have orchestrated that whole thing," she whispered. "And if I had to guess, I'd say it was your father, Martin." A chill ran down my spine at her words, but I couldn't deny the ring of truth in them. Of course, my father was behind this latest stunt. He was the only one with enough motive and malice to stoop so low. "Mrs. Hendricks," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "if you're willing to come forward, to tell your story, it could be the key to stopping my father's campaign against us, once and for all." The older woman's eyes widened slightly, but then her jaw set in a determined line. "Of course, dear," she said firmly. "Anything to help protect that sweet little boy. Your father has gone too far this time, and someone needs to put a stop to it." As she turned to leave, I felt a surge of gratitude and newfound resolve. We might be outnumbered and outgunned, but with allies like Mrs. Hendricks on our side, we just might have a fighting chance. Rejoining Barrett in the living room, I filled him in on our unexpected stroke of luck. His expression was one of cautious optimism, tinged with a hint of something darker. The knowledge that, no matter what, we were in for the fight of our lives. "This is it, Julia," he said, his voice low and intense. "No more playing defense. It's time to take the battle to your father and show him just how far we're willing to go to protect our family." As I met his steely gaze, I felt a surge of conviction coursing through me. My father had declared war on us, and now we were ready to unleash hell in return. No more hiding, no more cowering in fear. It was time to fight for what was ours, no matter the cost. The community hall was packed to the rafters, a sea of familiar faces whispering and shifting restlessly in their seats. At the front of the room, a long table had been set up, flanked by microphones and a projection screen. The stage for the showdown I'd been both dreading and anticipating. As Barrett, Rowan, Diz, and I took our seats in the front row, I could feel the weight of 1,000 judging eyes bearing down on me. These were the same people who just weeks ago had been all too eager to believe the worst about us, to cast us as pariahs based on nothing but baseless rumors and lies. But tonight, the tables were turned. Tonight, we held all the cards, and I intended to play them mercilessly. A hush fell over the crowd as my father strode to the front of the room, his expression a mask of smug superiority. He clearly expected this to be another opportunity to publicly humiliate and berate me, to reassert his dominance and control. Little did he know, the ground was about to shift beneath his feet. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice ringing out with false bonhomie. "As you know, there have been some concerns raised about my daughter Julia's ability to properly care for her nephew, Rowan." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and I felt Barrett's hand squeeze mine in a silent show of support. "However," my father continued, "I'm pleased to say that those concerns have been thoroughly investigated and found to be baseless." He shot me a pointed look, clearly expecting gratitude or relief. But the hard line of my jaw and the fire blazing in my eyes must have given him pause, because his bravado faltered ever so slightly. "With that said," he pressed on, "I think it's important that we, as a community, have an open and honest discussion about—" But before he could finish his thought, I was on my feet, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Save it, Dad," I spat, every ounce of anger and hurt I'd been harboring pouring forth. "We all know the truth here, that you orchestrated this whole charade in a desperate attempt to turn everyone against me and Barrett." Gasps and murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd, but I pressed on, undeterred. "You spread vicious rumors, you staged pranks to intimidate us, and you even went so far as to file a false report with Child Protective Services. All because you couldn't handle the fact that I dared to defy you and stand up for my family." My father's face had gone deathly pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and disbelief, but before he could formulate a response, I turned to the crowd, leveling them with a steely glare. "And you, all of you, were so quick to believe the worst, to turn your backs on us based on nothing but gossip and hearsay. Well, let me tell you something. Rowan is the light of our lives, and we would never, ever do anything to jeopardize his well-being." Holding up a thick manila envelope, I fixed my father with a look of pure contempt. "In here, I have documented proof of every underhanded, despicable thing you've done. The rumors, the threats, the false reports. I have witness statements, photos, even recordings, all of it laying bare the depths of your cruelty and manipulation." A deafening silence hung in the air as I let my words sink in, watched the realization dawn on face after face in the crowd. "So go ahead, Dad," I said, my voice ringing out with a triumphant finality. "Tell them all how you tried to destroy your own daughter's life, all because you couldn't handle the truth. That Rowan is better off with us than he ever would have been with you." For a long, tense moment, no one spoke. Then slowly, one by one, people began to rise to their feet. A chorus of murmurs and whispers swelling into a roar of condemnation aimed squarely at my father. As he stood there, frozen and impotent, I felt a surge of vindication so powerful it was almost dizzying. Finally, after months of torment and humiliation, the tables had turned, and my father had been exposed for the petty, vindictive bully he truly was. Gathering Rowan into my arms, I turned and strode from the hall, my head held high and my heart swelling with pride. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Still, in that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, as a family, united and unbreakable. The fallout from the town hall meeting was swift and merciless. Within days, news of my father's despicable actions had spread like wildfire, igniting a firestorm of public outrage and condemnation. Longtime friends and business associates, once so eager to curry favor with the great Martin Trenton, now turned their backs on him in droves. Contracts were terminated, partnerships dissolved, all severed with a callous efficiency that spoke volumes about the true loyalties at play. I'll admit, there was a part of me that reveled in my father's downfall, a petty satisfaction in watching his meticulously constructed empire crumble around him. But the greater part of me, the part that still loved him in spite of everything, felt a profound sadness at how far he had fallen. "Julia," Barrett said one evening as we sat watching Rowan play on the living room floor, "I got another call today. Hendricks & Sons wanted to let me know they're pulling out of the Henderson development deal." I nodded, unsurprised. The Hendricks family had been among my father's most loyal business partners for decades. Their defection was yet another nail in the coffin of his once formidable reputation. "How's he taking it?" I asked, unable to keep the hint of concern from creeping into my voice. Barrett's expression darkened. "About as well as you'd expect. Apparently he went on quite the tirade, threatening lawsuits and all sorts of retaliation." I sighed, shaking my head. Even in the face of his own undoing, my father couldn't let go of his toxic need for control, his desperate grasp for power and influence. "I almost feel sorry for him," I murmured, watching as Rowan happily assembled a tower of wooden blocks, oblivious to the turmoil swirling around him. Barrett snorted. "After everything he put us through? Don't waste your sympathy on that bastard." His words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they laid bare the harsh reality of our situation. My father had made his choice, and in doing so he had sacrificed any right to our compassion or understanding. Still, I couldn't shake the nagging sense of guilt that gnawed at me, the feeling that perhaps I could have done something, anything, to prevent this devastating outcome. As if sensing my inner turmoil, Barrett reached over and took my hand, his touch grounding me in the present. "Hey," he said softly, "don't do that to yourself. Your father brought this on himself with his own actions. You gave him chance after chance to make things right, and he spat in your face every time." I knew he was right, but the weight of our fractured family ties still felt like a heavy burden to bear. "I just wish things could have been different," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I wish he could have seen Rowan for the incredible blessing he is, instead of treating him like some kind of burden or embarrassment." Barrett's expression softened, and he pulled me into a warm embrace. "I know," he murmured, "but that's on him, not you. You've done everything in your power to create a loving, supportive home for Rowan, and for that, you should be proud." As I held my husband close, watching our nephew giggle with delight at his tower of blocks, I felt a surge of certainty wash over me. No matter what trials or tribulations lay ahead, no matter how far my father fell, or how much he lashed out in his anger and shame, we would persevere. Our family, forged in the fires of adversity and strengthened by our unwavering love for one another, was unbreakable. And as long as we stood together, no force on earth, not even the wrath of my once formidable father, could tear us apart. The weeks and months that followed were a whirlwind of activity, as Barrett and I worked tirelessly to rebuild our lives in the wake of my father's downfall. With his influence and connections severed, the once formidable Martin Trenton found himself increasingly isolated and powerless. Meanwhile, our own star seemed to be on the rise. Bolstered by the outpouring of support from our friends and neighbors, we were able to secure new business opportunities and professional connections, slowly but surely restoring the stability and security that my father had so callously tried to strip away. But more importantly, we were able to refocus our energy on what truly mattered most, providing a loving, nurturing home for Rowan. With the threat of my father's interference finally at bay, we enrolled Rowan in a specialized school program tailored to his unique needs and strengths. It was a joy to watch him blossom and thrive in that supportive environment, his bright mind and boundless curiosity finding fertile ground to grow. At home, our little family unit grew closer and stronger with each passing day. Barrett and I made a point of setting aside dedicated family time, whether it was a cozy movie night or a rambunctious game of backyard tag. We wanted Rowan to feel cherished, accepted, and above all, loved, the very things my father had so callously denied him. And through it all, the community that had once turned its back on us rallied around us with open arms. Invitations to social gatherings and neighborhood events poured in, each one a testament to the collective remorse and renewed acceptance we had earned through our unwavering resilience. Even Mrs. Hendricks, the kindly neighbor who had played such a pivotal role in our fight against my father, became a regular fixture in our lives. Her warm smiles and steady stream of freshly baked treats were a constant reminder of the power of compassion and solidarity in the face of adversity. As for my father, well, his fate was a cautionary tale of pride and hubris run amok. Stripped of his wealth, his influence, and his power, he became a virtual pariah, shunned by the very people who had once fawned over him. I'll admit, there were moments when I felt a pang of sorrow for the once mighty man who had fallen so far. But those moments were fleeting, quickly overshadowed by the knowledge that his downfall was entirely of his own making. Perhaps, in time, he might come to see the error of his ways, might find it in his heart to seek redemption and reconciliation. But for now, I had to accept the harsh reality that the man I had once idolized was gone, replaced by a bitter, broken shadow of his former self. And so, we carried on, our little family unit forging ahead with unwavering determination. The road ahead was sure to be paved with challenges and obstacles, but we were ready to face them head-on, bolstered by the knowledge that we had already weathered the worst storm imaginable and emerged victorious. As I watched Rowan giggle and chase butterflies in our backyard, his face aglow with the innocent joy of childhood, I felt a surge of gratitude and pride. This was what we had fought for, what we had sacrificed and endured, a chance to provide a safe, loving haven for this precious boy, free from the toxicity and cruelty that had once threatened to consume us all. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what the future held, our family was unbreakable. We had faced down the worst that life could throw at us and emerged stronger, more resilient, and more fiercely committed to one another than ever before. Come what may, we would face it together, and we would emerge victorious, time and time again.